This week on Forward.
What is the First Lady of China doing living in Berkeley, California in the middle of the Second World War? So I spun this whole mystery out of that, and the part that was really fun for me that was more like being a lawyer is the research that went into learning about the history of the Bay Area during that time. I wrote that Tiger Mom memoir, the first 2/3 of it, in 3 months. It was just supposed to be this fun thing. My younger daughter had rebelled. And honestly, I just thought it was going to be funny.
It is my pleasure to welcome to the podcast Yale Law professor, multi-time best-selling author, public intellectual, and now novelist, author of the brand new novel, The Golden Gate, Amy Chua. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you for having me, Andrew.
Holy cow, Amy. I've admired your work for a long time. I'm so glad now that we've actually gotten to know each other in person in real life, which is a very exciting thing.
I know.
Most people, when they hear your name, and I hope this doesn't, surprise you at all, they might think, who is that? Who is that? And then they think, Tiger Mom.
Yep.
Well, I mean, you have a very multi-pronged legacy, which we'll get into for sure. But were you surprised by what a chord that book struck?
Oh my gosh, I was completely unprepared, and people don't believe that. This is now like 12 years ago. I wrote that in 2011. And all my other books, my foreign policy books, my books on political tribalism, each of those books took me like 3 or 4 years to write. I wrote that Tiger Mom memoir, the first 2/3 of it, in 3 months. It was just supposed to be this fun thing. My younger daughter had rebelled. And honestly, I just thought it was going to be funny. And I think a lot of people didn't quite realize it was even a whole book. It got excerpted the most provocative parts. And I think a lot of people just thought it was a Wall Street Journal article. They had slapped the headline on it, something like "Why Chinese Mothers Are Superior" or something, and it just triggered this global firestorm. And I didn't have social media, I was completely unprepared for it. I'd never been on TV before, so it was a crazy ride.
Well, certainly I remember that period. even as like just an ordinary civilian, being like, huh, and obviously being Asian American myself, I was like, oh, some of it felt familiar. But to your point, I mean, you've had a number of major intellectual contributions over the last number of years. I just picked up at a random airport bookstore your book on triple threat with your husband Jed.
Yep.
Why
Triple package. Yeah.
Triple package. Thank you.
Yeah.
Why certain groups seem to succeed at various levels. And I read it and I thought to myself, wow, this is very interesting and provocative stuff. And you've kind of made it a habit of tackling things that other people shy away from, I suppose. I feel like you're like a commenter on unspoken truths.
Yeah, each of my books, I actually don't think that if you read it from cover to cover should be controversial in any way. That book was called The Triple Package, The Rise and Fall of Cultural Groups in America. And it does talk about how and why certain groups at any given point in history in the United States seem to be outperforming others. But like right off the bat, it says, we figured out that it's not genetic, that it's nothing static, that anybody can access it. So why it kind of got taken to be controversial. The thesis of that book was that that these 3 qualities in certain groups. The first is what we called, maybe provocatively, a superiority complex, which is like a sense of being special or a sense of exceptionalism, like the Jews being the chosen people or the Mormons or I don't know if you ever got this, like in a lot of Chinese families, there's a sense of we're from the oldest civilization, this great middle kingdom. But coupled with that first trait, we discovered that a second trait is indispensable, and that's seemingly the opposite. And that is a sense of deep insecurity. And it's those two things combined, the sense of exceptionalism that you're special in some way, which a parent could instill in you. I remember Sonia Sotomayor told me she identified with this. But that coupled with insecurity is what creates drive. It makes people feel, I'm not being respected enough. I need to show everybody. And I think that you'll see that a lot of immigrants groups tend to outperform other groups, and that's often because they are outsiders. They have this sense of insecurity. And the third trait is just impulse control, which is kind of self-discipline. So yeah, we had a fun time with that book, and it applies to individuals and corporations and universities, not just cultural groups in America.
Yeah, I thought of it as a chip on the shoulder.
Yes,
But
we even use that term.
yeah, you do. And reading the book did feel familiar in various ways. I think that your observation that reading a book cover to cover, you're like, sure. and then if you take out this element or that element, then it can become sensationalized or overly dramatized.
I think you are such a triple package individual, Andrew. I think you're a
Oh,
perfect example, and I mean that in a really good way.
well, thank you. I mean, coming from you, that's the highest of compliments. Also, I have met your daughters, however briefly, and whatever you did seemed to have worked swimmingly. So it should be
Thank
very, very,
you.
very, very proud. I mean, they're
Thank you.
incredibly impressive individuals. So, political tribes, group instinct, and the fate of nations. What's fascinating here is that you applied this both internationally and domestically, where you said, look, the U.S. seems to have these blind spots when it comes to tribalism, where you think that people are going to see things in ideological terms, for example, capitalism versus communism or democracy versus autocracy, when really typically a society is just made up of a couple of tribes who may or may not like each other. And one example
Yeah.
is Sunnis and Shias in a place like Iraq. And America seems to omit that particular dynamic when it comes and has these large scale interventions, sometimes, unfortunately, quite tragically.
Yeah, I actually say that the reason for our biggest foreign policy disasters in the last 50 years, from Vietnam to Afghanistan to Iraq, all come from the fact that we know so little about the group dynamics or the tribal affiliations that matter most to the people that we're supposedly trying to help. And this is an earlier book I wrote, World on Fire, but I did actually call the Iraq dynamic exactly correctly. A lot of people at that time, including friends of mine like Noah Feldman, said, look, we're going to put in elections and the Sunnis and Shias and, with Kurds are all going to come together. And I was saying, no, there's this concept of a market dominant minority. That is when you have a situation where a small group like, say, the Sunnis that are only about 14% of the population are viewed as having controlled the levers of power for so long, economic power, maybe political power. Then if you do overnight democracy, majority rule can actually be very destabilizing because guess what? Suddenly given the vote, the new majority, in this case the Shias, they're not necessarily going to vote for moderate, friendly policies, but instead they're going to vote for revenge, and that's exactly what happened. So I said that's what happened in Vietnam too, and yeah, so that's the kind of international component of it, and I do apply that to the United States as well.
Imagine running for president and wanting to share what you experienced in a way that's entertaining, edifying, and maybe even a little bit scary. That's The Last Election, out in bookstores now. A novel about an independent presidential candidate, a journalist with a massive story, and what the heck could be our next/last election. Check it out at andrewyang.com. Yeah, domestically, you said, look, hey, the educated elite is, believe it or not, a tribe. Kind of, maybe even takes on various tribal instincts and behaviors. And that tribe facilitated the rise of Trump in a way because it has blind spots when it came to some of Trump's appeal. There ended up being this us versus them dynamic that continues to this day in many ways. And you see it where there are folks who are of a particular educated class who just don't seem to be able to understand that folks of another class or educational background might have a completely different perspective, and that perspective may be something they actually hold to very, very strongly, and they think is as legitimate as your point of view. And you wrote this back in 2018. How have things played out since then, and what was the reaction to your argument?
Yeah, Andrew, this is where your projects and your work and your party are so aligned. I mean, just coincidentally, back in 2018, so I was actually one of the people that predicted the Trump election, and
Wow.
Yale Law School is it's an amazing place. The people are brilliant and very much at the time involved with Hillary Clinton's campaign. But I could see at the time that there were some serious blind spots. And as we now all know, those very states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, that whole block of states that the Democrats weren't really paying attention to. They actually went to Donald Trump that year. And so it's very similar to what I was talking about with developing countries. One of the things I say in my books is that the United States, we've had a lot of problems, but we've never had this problem of a market dominant minority. That is a little ethnic group like the Chinese in Indonesia or the whites in South Africa, or even the lighter skinned Europeanized elites in Venezuela that are viewed as controlling the economy and being very arrogant and insular and not caring about the rest of the country. The United States, we've always just had a lot of mobility, and there's no one ethnic group, not Asians, not Jews. They may be disproportionately successful, but they don't actually control 70% of the economy. But what I wrote in this recent book is that I'm worried that just in the last 5 to 10 years, we're seeing the emergence of our own very idiosyncratic form of a market dominant minority in the United States. And this is the group that you referred to, that sometimes called cosmopolitan elites, sometimes called coastal elites. And the irony is, these are all my friends. I'm in this category myself. I think people who teach at Columbia or NYU or Harvard or Yale or work on Wall Street or Hollywood, a lot of the central figures in DC, we view ourselves as so tolerant and open-minded and cosmopolitan. It's the other side that's intolerant. And one of the provocative things I say in Political Tribes is we don't realize how, coastal elites don't realize how insular and actually perceived as arrogant they come off as to the rest of the country. Coastal elites, they actually pretty much, they're not an ethnic group, but they dress very similarly. They send their kids to the same schools. They eat the same foods. They like the same aesthetics. They vacation in the same places. And it is, in fact, this is something that you've really been so important in. It is, in fact, the case that wealth in this country is incredibly concentrated on our two coasts. And coastal elites do actually dominate and control many of the same sectors that market dominant minorities like the Chinese in the Philippines or the Lebanese in West Africa control. For example, Wall Street or Silicon Valley, the Ivy League, Washington in many ways. So what I predicted in that book was that I actually predicted that we were going to see in the election of 2016 the rise of demagogues that would actually play on this and say, hey, this country is being controlled by a small number of people who live on the coast who don't care about real Americans. So we need to make America great again. We need to take back the country. And that kind of rhetoric is something that we've seen actually more commonly in developing countries like Robert Mugabe in Zimbabwe or Hugo Chavez in Venezuela. So the thesis of political tribalism was a little scary. It was that for the first time in all of U.S. history, we're starting to see certain very specific kinds of destructive ethno and ethno-nationalist kinds of political dynamics that are much more common in developing countries than, previously the United States.
Do you know Barbara Walter, the political scientist? She wrote something similar in her book. I think it was called How Civil Wars Start.
I've heard of it. Haven't read it yet. No.
And you guys would probably get along. But what she did is she went into various developing countries and she saw these patterns that you're describing. And there was a very consistent pattern around someone appealing to nativism and a certain group that I think even had a technical term. I think it was called, oh my gosh, Barbara, I'm sorry, I'm going to mess this up, but it's, I think it was something like Children of the Earth or something very, very specific sounding, but you read it and I was like, Children of the Earth or whatever the heck it was. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, I think that's Sons of the Soil. It is something like that.
Sons of the Soil, that was it. Thank you, Amy. Yep. It was Sons of the Soil.
Yeah. In Malaysia, because the idea is like we're the real people. We're the people who were originally here. And, in a funny way, President Donald Trump's kind of make America great again. Let's take back our country away from, the Chinese and the Mexicans. It is tapping into a similar dynamic, like this idea that there are real Americans who are, and a lot of was very effective actually in this country saying, you know what, these elites, they care more about the poor in Africa.
The Richmond, North of Richmond song. I mean, you hear that, you see that, and think, yes,
absolutely.
I mean, it strikes the same chord. Though he himself is not, he wants nothing to do with the tribalism.
He's cool. He's like, I'm really not taking sides here.
yeah, totally. But of course, America being what it is today, one side tried to claim it. And I'm happy to say, at least, like some people on the other side saw it as what it was, which struck me as just a deep popular appeal, which is, look, man, I mean, things aren't going our way. and the natural thing is to blame someone. And so the image of Richmond, North of Richmond was very evocative.
Yeah, totally. And he wasn't like some famous pop singer. I mean, I watched him many times. He really sounds like an authentic guy,
Hey YouTube, glad you're enjoying the podcast. If you really like it, hit subscribe, and then YouTube will notify you every time we have a bang up new guest. Thank you. So you've taught some folks who've gone on to become very, very prominent figures in various ways. And I just had a question for you. So I was at a party, and then someone came up to me who I knew by reputation, and they knew me by reputation. And they said to me, hey, I don't know you. I just know all of like the stuff I've seen from and about you in various media, but I tend to throw all that stuff out because I know the media is just a bunch of like distortions and funhouse mirrors. So very pleased to meet you and just want to be able to meet you as an actual human.
I love that.
Yeah, no, it was very, I was like, oh, thank you. I mean, it did make me think it's like, oh shit, like are people trashing me in the media? like, what are you ignoring here? But
yeah, I've been there.
Yeah, we could talk about that. But for you, you must have, at this point, half a dozen to a dozen former students who are in the public eye in various ways. And then people probably come to you and figure, hey, what's up with this person? What's up with that person? How much does the depiction in the media line up with the human being or not line up in your experience?
Pretty terribly, honestly, to support your story. So, I'm really proud of my students who range from extreme left to extreme right. So just give you two examples. Ronan Farrow, who broke the whole Me Too movement, was my
Wow.
former student and pretty much wrote every paper with me, and we were always very close. And as everybody knows, J.D. Vance, at the other extreme, author of Hillbilly Elegy, was also my student, and we're also very close. And it's so funny. Like, I remember both those guys as people who were just lost. And that's why they came to me. I tend to mentor people who are a little bit outsiders, partly just because of who I am. I think any kind of outsider. I mean, there's so many ways of being an outsider.
Sure.
And JD, just honestly now, gosh, he's a senator, and there's so much stuff about him, and it's unrecognizable for me. Like, I remember him; he came and he kind of stuck out. He was dressed differently than everybody else, sounded a little different, was unusually tall. And I remember in the first week of school, he was practically wanted to drop out. He just felt like everything he said just sounded stupid, and we really bonded. At one point, he really was going to drop out. It was actually when his girlfriend, now wife, wanted to take a break, and he's like, So I just think of these guys as just sincere, authentic, real, warm people. And now that they're so successful, what I read about them in the press is it's totally a caricature. First of all, again, if you were to literally take every single thing these people have said, it would not add up to that. And same with Ronan Farrow. He came in very young. He went to Bard, so I think he was like 16 or something when he started law school. And, yes, no, he was seriously, maybe he was 18, but he had skipped all these years. He was like a prodigy and absolutely brilliant. But same thing, like now he's such a celebrity and, does these amazing things. But at the time, he was a little bit of a misfit. He came in crutches because he had something happened when he was in Africa. So his first day of school, he's 5 years younger than everybody else, and he comes in on 2 crutches. And so I remember these people warmly, and we're still friends. Vivek Ramaswamy is another one. I didn't teach him, but he's another one of our former students that we're close to. So I try to keep the politics out of it. Every time something comes up, the press calls me and asks me to denounce these people, or and I just won't do it. I think that makes some people mad, but it's just my policy. I'm not going to ever trash talk any former students.
I would say it's a fine policy myself. I mean, it would allow folks to actually get to know you as their professor and mentor without thinking years later they're going to get a
Yes,
going to get a
turn
call.
on them. It's one of the best parts of my job. I'm not like a great legal theorist, but I do love mentoring people who feel like they might want to drop out of law school, because that's kind of how I felt.
Well, my big jam is trying to talk people out of going to law school. Though Yale is somewhat special. I mean, there's a joke in legal circles that if you don't want to actually be a lawyer, go to Yale.
There is some truth to that.
I mean, if you could actually get in, which I did not. So I had a question on this. Like, there was like a very, very strange controversy at Yale around your mentoring students. Like, there was something where it somehow got painted in a negative light. And to this day, like, I just remember this, what struck me, frankly, as a bit of a smear job that didn't fully make sense. It was
crazy.
But it'd be one reason why if like your natural inclination is like, look, I'm not going to like join in a pylon because I think you might have actually experienced a pylon yourself for some reason.
Oh, completely. Now, anytime it's human nature, I'll read about anybody, Kate Middleton or just anything. And it's your natural instinct is like, it's just fun to gossip and to imagine the worst. But I have so changed. Like, I just take everything with a grain of salt, no matter what it is. That thing was, it was like 3 years ago, and it blew over. I think it was called Dinner Party Gate or something. And it was in the middle of COVID. And honestly, Andrew, now I think that a lot of it had to do with the pandemic. People were cooped up. It was the first year where students, instead of the first year students getting to meet in small groups and have picnics and go out, everybody was on Zoom. And so, you couldn't make friends. You couldn't really meet your professors in person. And somehow this rumor started that I was having dinner parties with, I think, federal judges and a secret group of students, drunken dinner parties. This was so crazy. It was so surreal. It was literally like Kafkaesque, But and I was very upset at the time, and it got covered because of who I am. It was like, how is this stupid thing? Why does it make the New Yorker and the New York Times? But in the end, I kind of believe in the system. I mean, I feel like I was vindicated. University looked into it thoroughly and found absolutely no basis for any of these crazy things, and everything's back to normal now. And I love my students. I have these giant classes. So, if you just this is the tiger parenting part. My parents, the one thing is they said, just push through. Just don't give up. Just push through. It'll get better.
This podcast is sponsored by ExpressVPN. Using the internet without ExpressVPN is like not paying attention to the safety demonstration on a flight. Most of the time you'll probably be fine. But what if one day that weird yellow mask drops down from overhead and you have no idea what to do? It's better to be safe than sorry. That's why I recommend using ExpressVPN, the network that's used by high-end corporations for their remote workers, so that everything they do is hacker-proof, anonymous, and verified. I like ExpressVPN because it's easy to use, one click and you're done, and you can access content that you might not be able to see otherwise from Europe on Netflix and other providers. Secure your online data today by visiting expressvpn.com/yang. That's expressvpn.com/yang. And you can get an extra 3 months free. expressvpn.com/yang. So we have something else in common, though you're better at probably both of them. But after writing 5 nonfiction books, some of which were international bestsellers, now you've written your first novel, The
Same
Golden
with
Gate.
you. Yours is so much more exciting.
Well, mine is darker, though yours gets...
It is darker.
Mine's a little bit more...
Oh, it's so relevant.
No, mine's straightforward, whereas yours is actually literary. Is the way I would describe yours. It's like, oh wow, Amy wrote like a piece of literature, which I found very, very impressive and sophisticated.
Thank you. I don't think people knew this about me, but when I was little, I had very strict parents, and so we weren't allowed a huge amount of social freedom. So I was a huge bookworm. My favorite thing was to go to the public library. I went to public schools, carry home all these books, and they were actually always novels, and in particular, always murder mysteries. I read every single Agatha Christie. So it was my first love, and I tried to write a novel, what I was trying to get out of Wall Street. This is to your point. I graduated from law school, and I was like, why did I do this? I found myself in corporate law, not good at it, bored by it, but also just not talented at it. So I tried to write a novel back then, and I couldn't quite pull it together. And yes, it was actually during COVID that I finally had time. A plot just hit me. And it's so funny, Andrew, the coincidence, right? Because we were thinking about the political tribalism issues at exactly the same time. I still remember getting an email from you right around 2016, 17, or maybe 2015, thinking about the same issues. And then when I found out that your novel, that you had written a novel, and that it's coming out a week before mine, I'm like, this guy's always ahead of me.
Or we're just on the same wavelength.
Yes, that too.
So this plot hit you during COVID. I think it's a very impressive, sophisticated piece of literature, and I use that term deliberately. But it interweaves family, geopolitics, race, California history, and that there are very timely themes around, I suppose, like a country that is in the throes of a conflict and thus has some mistreatment of various groups within it, which unfortunately is something that we kind of sense like might become relevant today.
Yeah.
So in your case, you got hit by this plot. How did you go about saying, you know what, I'm actually going to write this novel? There's a lot of research involved in your novel, clearly.
Yes, and lawyer stuff. So the book is a historical murder thriller set in the San Francisco Bay Area in 1944. And the book opens with a grandmother from one of San Francisco's oldest families being told by the district attorney that one of her three granddaughters is a murderer and they don't know which one. So that's the thing that hit me. I came up with this idea of a grandmother who's told that one of her three granddaughters is the murderer, and I kind of thought of the twist, which I won't give away, a bunch of twists. And then I was actually in my parents' house. So I actually, my parents are American dream exemplars. Like I grew up in a very small house in a place called El Cerrito in the Bay Area. I went to public high schools. But by the time I went to college, my parents had moved to another house in the Berkeley Hills. And it turns out that that house was where Madame Chiang Kai-shek, the former First Lady of China, lived in 1943 to 1944. For reasons to this day nobody knows. What is the First Lady of China doing living in Berkeley, California in the middle of the Second World War? So I spun this whole mystery out of that, and the part that was really fun for me that was more like being a lawyer is the research that went into learning about the history of the Bay Area during that time. So obviously it was the time of the Japanese internment, which I think has, in some ways a lot of parallels to our to today. There was a lot of class conflict. There were a lot of poor whites that had come from the Dust Bowl. African Americans actually came in for the first time, I did not know that, to build these ships, all these shipyards, because after Pearl Harbor, we didn't have a Navy anymore. So the Bay Area was transformed into literally the largest shipbuilding center in history. And I never knew any of this growing up in the Bay Area. Just about 20 years before that, they had forcibly deported, maybe 1 million people back to Mexico. So there were just a lot of themes that are parallel in some ways to what's happening in America right now. But, because it was a long time ago, it was just easier and less stressful to write about. It's a backdrop that raises a lot of the same issues that we have today. But first and foremost, it's supposed to be an entertaining thriller, a big whodunit.
Well, it succeeds on the level of entertainment, and I learned a lot. That my parents met at UC Berkeley in the 60s.
I didn't know that. Oh my God.
And my brother's named after the Lawrence Hall of Science. So we joke my parents got busy there, though I'm sure they didn't. But whenever we're in town, we bring my kids to the Lawrence Hall of Science and be like, look, this is your uncle's named after. So I felt a little bit of a kinship with the some of the historical events, even though my parents got there later.
Yeah, did you know that Berkeley's so famously liberal right now, but that whole neighborhood, and I think they might still exist today, all of the houses have these racial covenants in them. So somebody had to intervene, like technically no Chinese people, no non-whites could live in Berkeley, certainly in the Berkeley Hills. And Madame Chiang Kai-shek had to get some rich banker friend from Wells Fargo to help. So there's just a lot of really, and there are all these interesting characters too. There's this woman named Mom Chung, and how could I not know this, right? She's like the first Chinese-American woman doctor in the United States, and she was such a character. She would have these soirees that John Wayne and Ronald Reagan and all these Hollywood stars would come, and
Wow.
she was probably lesbian. She dressed like a man and never married. At her funeral, Admiral Nimitz was one of her pallbearers. It's like this crazy celebrity figure who lived in San Francisco and was years ahead of her time, attended a lot of bohemian nightclubs. So it was fun learning about people like her and this guy, August Vollmer, who, again, from Berkeley, California, he was the founder of American policing. All these things that we teach people in law school, all the techniques, fingerprinting and two-way mirrors or one-way mirrors. All of that was in Berkeley, California, like up the street from where my parents live. So that was a really fun piece of, research and investigative work.
This podcast is sponsored by Helix Sleep. It's a pretty short list of things you can do that are going to make you happier, healthier, more energetic, more productive every single day. You know what's on that list? Getting the right freaking mattress. And what's the right mattress for you? If you go to Helix Sleep, you take their personalized sleep quiz and they will send you one of 20 unique mattresses made for you and you alone. Well, not you and you alone, like 5% of people. Do the math. For a 100-night free trial, you can sleep on this thing for 3 months. It will keep you cool. Don't just take my word for it. My kids seek out this mattress in the house. It's the #1 rated mattress picked by GQ and Wired magazine. This mattress will actually make you happier, healthier, and more productive. Helix is offering 20% off all mattress orders and 2 free pillows for our listeners. Go to helixsleep.com/yang. This is their best offer yet, and it won't last long. With Helix, better sleep starts now. So after you finish the novel, actually, and this is just an insidery thing, maybe, but it might be interesting. So you're known for writing best-selling nonfiction books. How did your agent respond to the fact, "Hey, I've got a novel," and then was it? And do you feel too? And this is one of the jokes I told. I was at a party with some famous people, and there was a person who had their first book coming out, and I said, "You know what? You can't get away with saying." "Hey, I wrote this book and it's just a casual thing and you should check it out," because because like a book actually takes like a significant investment of time and energy. It becomes personal pretty quickly. And so for you, is there like some nervousness around this being your first foray into fiction? Like, do you have other stories that have hit you even since the time that you finished this book? Because that does happen to my creative and novelist friends, where they all of a sudden start getting pelted with new stories and characters.
Yeah. Well, first of all, my agent basically punted me. She was like, "I don't represent what, what are you doing now?" And she introduced me to a different agent. So I'm represented by somebody different for this novel. And yes, I'm terrified. And I actually don't have I'm not, gosh, maybe this is defensive, but I don't have, crazy expectations. I felt like I wanted to prove it to myself. I wanted to make it all work. So as you know, writing a thriller, it has to come together. Like, you can't cheat. Like, you have to make a timeline. The facts have to fit together. And especially if it's like a mystery, when you reveal it, your readers are going to be mad if the clues aren't all there. Like, it has to be plausible, but you also have to keep it from the readers. So for me, a lot of the analytics was very similar in some ways to being a lawyer. Like, how do I keep everything straight, but also hide the ball, but piece it all together like a puzzle? So that part I really liked. I mostly just wanted this to be a really fast-paced, fun. Talk about fast-paced. I could not put your book down. I was just flipping. That takes skill. And so I would like to try to write a different one. I do have an idea, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. Like, let's see what happens to this one first. And
that is one of the things that happens to us. Amy, is the same way. It's like, I'm like, oh, I'd kind of like to do something else in this space. It's like, oh, I have to wait and see what happens with this one. Though, as you say it out loud, I think The Golden Gate would make a fantastic mini series, limited series, because it is very, very intricately plotted and smart. People probably can tell. I mean, you're a brilliant human and a brilliant writer, and having that intellect applied to plotting was something of a joy. Just because one of the most frustrating things is when it doesn't hold up. It's like so sorry anyone who's associated with this, but like certain TV shows pop to mind for me where it's like, that TV show didn't hold up down the stretch, and then you're like,
the killer. Or the killer is somebody that you just meet at the last second. Like, that's not fair. If it's like a big mystery thing, you're wondering which of the 10 people did it. It can't just be a stranger off the street that comes on at the last second. So, but thank you.
It has to land. And the great thing for the reader with your book is you actually feel like you're in good hands. You don't feel that sense of being cheated. What you get when it doesn't hold up, and in your case it holds up. So
I got to tell you, my agents, I have really good agents, and this was so this took me during COVID to write, like maybe 2 years. But at one point, I turned in this manuscript, and they gave me all these great comments about what didn't work. So then I, being myself, worked really, really hard, and sent back something, like a month later. There was a long silence, and then my agent called me and said, "Okay, we read this, and you've made it worse." And they're like, "You are, you always, we like you a lot, but you always have to be that A student, and fiction's a little different. Sometimes you need to let it percolate and think and let yourself be artistic." So my agent actually said, "I'm not, on the next round, I'm not going to read this for 8 months." Oh my God, Andrew, this almost killed me, but I'm so impatient. She's like, "I really want you to think about this." And so the process was a learning one for me too. Like she's like, "I want you to read some novels and just like, switch your mentality away from foreign policy books." So it worked in the end, but I had to have I made a lot of mistakes, and I got some good help.
Well, I dare say, Amy, I think you might have unlocked a different part of your brain. And I, for one, hope that continues, that part of your brain actually gives rise to more intelligent, well-crafted stories filled with vibrant characters. Yeah, like I actually would love to see the Golden Gate miniseries, and I can imagine various actors vying for various parts. It'd be great. And it is like a different journey. I will say on like my side, I mean, I had a co-author who went through a lot of the process and pains that you're describing. So I cannot lay claim to have gone through the similar process, but it really is such a different, it's like a different writing style. And because of the different writing style, it's like a different brain wiring.
Totally.
And yeah. And so for like I just give you so much credit for accessing new brain wiring in this way.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it does. You're right. You have to practice your brain, right? Because I keep wanting to. I don't know. Like it's weird in a way. If you get good at this, you have much more freedom in writing fiction. Like you could just invent. But at the very beginning, I had to draw on autobiographical things or people I know. Like it's actually really a challenge just to invent a character out of nothing, So yeah, I think we probably went through a lot of the same learning curve.
Yeah, what's funny is when you write nonfiction, you're always fastidious about like have to make sure that's factually accurate, have to make sure this. And then the fictional element, it's like, well, I have to make sure this person seems real and that whatever detail I include is actually pretty accurate. And
Yeah.
the easiest way to do that is to base it on an actual human. Because then you can just point to that person and be like, no,
Right.
look, like they're right there.
You better pick an interesting one.
Well, people should definitely check out The Golden Gate if they are into any form of fiction, particularly murder mysteries. How can people keep up with you and your work, Amy? Because you're a bit of a polymath and you cover lots of different areas.
Well, maybe I'll see you on book tour. I mean, I'm going on my 3-week book tour, and people can always pick it up on Amazon or, my website, amychua.com. And yeah, it's really fun. I hope you and I end up on the same, maybe we'll see each other because our books are coming out almost at the exact same time.
Amy, I'll make a point of it. I'm going to show up to one of your events and then have you sign a copy for me and Evelyn. AmyChua.com, The Golden Gate, the novel. You can check out all of her other books too, because she's a brilliant woman with a whole lot of insight to offer on the world, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. Amy, please keep us posted, and can't wait to see what you do next.
Thank you, Andrew. You're an inspiration and a good friend, and good luck with your book too. Thanks for having me.